In 1882, a British archaeologist pulled a clay tablet out of the ruins of ancient Babylon. It was about the size of your hand, covered in symbols that hadn't been read in thousands of years. And when they finally translated it, they realized they were looking at the oldest known map of the world. The Babylonians drew the earth as a flat disk surrounded by bitter water. 7 cities marked across the surface, mountains in the north, the Euphrates River running through the centre. But here's what made historians lose their minds. Beyond the bitter water, the map shows 8 triangular regions, 8 lands that aren't supposed to exist. And one of them, according to the inscription, was massive, a continent-sized landmass that doesn't appear on any modern map. The tablet is called the Imago Mundi, and it's currently sitting in the British Museum raising questions that archaeologists still can't answer. If you're into this kind of content, hit subscribe. I cover lost history and unexplained artifacts every week. Now let's talk about what this map actually shows. The Imago Mundi dates back to sometime between 700 and 500 BCE, late Babylonian period, but the knowledge it contains, that's potentially much older. The Babylonians were notorious for copying ancient texts, preserving information that came from civilizations that existed thousands of years before them. The map itself is crude by modern standards, a circle with a few lines and wedge shapes pressed into wet clay. But the text surrounding it tells a different story. Cuneiform inscriptions describe what lies in each region. And that's where things get interesting. The centre shows Babylon itself, the city that considered itself the navel of the world. Around it, 7 other cities or regions, Assyria to the north, Der to the east, the usual players in Mesopotamian geography. Then comes the outer ring, the bitter water. This represents the ocean that the Babylonians believed encircled all known land. And beyond that ocean, the 8 regions marked as triangular projections. Region 1 describes a place where the sun is not seen. Eternal darkness. Region 4 mentions a horned bull that attacks newcomers. Region 5 talks about a winged creature as thick as a parsiktu, whatever that means. These aren't casual notes. They're detailed descriptions of lands that someone claimed to know about. And here's where the Tartaria connection comes in. One of those outer regions describes a land so large that even the inscription seems to struggle with its scale. A place of great distance, a place of abundance, a place that, according to some researchers, matches descriptions found in other ancient texts that refer to a northern empire. Now, mainstream archaeology writes these outer regions off as mythology, Babylonian imagination, the ancients trying to fill in the blanks of a world they didn't fully understand. But that explanation has problems. The Babylonians were sophisticated astronomers and mathematicians. They tracked planetary movements with terrifying accuracy. They calculated the length of the year to within minutes of our modern measurements. These weren't people who casually made things up. When they recorded something, they usually had a reason. So why would they draw a map with lands they'd never seen? Why include specific details about creatures, darkness, and distances? And why does one of those lands line up geographically with a region that other ancient sources also mention, a vast territory in the north that seems to vanish from later records? Let's talk about what we know for certain. The Imago Mundi is not unique, it's part of a tradition. Other Babylonian texts reference world maps. Other cultures around the Mediterranean and Near East created similar cosmological diagrams. The Greeks, the Egyptians, even early Islamic cartographers all inherited this model of a disc-shaped world surrounded by ocean. But the Babylonian version is different because it's older, and it includes those 8 outer regions, regions that don't appear on later maps. As if somewhere between 500 BCE and the rise of Greek geography, knowledge of these lands was lost, or deliberately erased. The British Museum keeps the tablet in a climate-controlled case. You can see it if you visit. It's surprisingly small, fragile, cracked in places where the clay dried unevenly thousands of years ago, but the inscriptions are still legible. and researchers continue to study it, looking for clues. In 2024, a new translation of the reverse side of the tablet revealed something that had been overlooked. Additional text describing one of the outer regions in more detail. It talks about a journey, a great voyage across the bitter water to reach a land of mountains and forests, a land where the people built with stone and measured time differently. That description has caused a stir. Because it doesn't sound mythological, it sounds like a travel log, like someone actually went there and came back to tell about it. Now, if you're waiting for me to say, this proves Tartaria existed, I'm not going to do that. What I will say is this: the idea that a large advanced civilization could have existed in northern Eurasia and then disappeared from mainstream historical records isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. We know that history gets rewritten. We know that conquering empires erase the achievements of the civilizations they replace. We know that entire cities can be buried and forgotten for millennia. Göbekli Tepe wasn't discovered until 1994, and it rewrote everything we thought we knew about early human civilization. The official narrative says the outer regions on the Imago Mundi are fantasy, myths, stories the Babylonians told themselves about the edges of the world. But the Babylonians had trade networks that stretched thousands of miles. They had diplomatic relationships with kingdoms we're still discovering today. They knew more about the world than we give them credit for. And if they knew about lands beyond the bitter water, lands large enough to warrant detailed descriptions, then where did that knowledge come from? Did Babylonian explorers actually make it that far? Did they hear stories from traders who travelled even further, or were they copying older maps made by civilizations that came before them? There's a reason the establishment doesn't like these questions, because once you start pulling the thread, the whole narrative starts to unravel. If the Babylonians knew about an eighth continent, what else did they know that we've been told to ignore? What other ancient texts are sitting in museum archives, untranslated or mistranslated because they don't fit the accepted timeline? The academic world has a vested interest in maintaining the current historical narrative. Entire careers are built on specific interpretations of the past. When evidence emerges that contradicts those theories, it's easier to dismiss it than to rewrite everything. Artifacts like the Imago Mundi get filed away as curiosities. The inscriptions describing outer regions get labelled as mythology, and anyone who suggests these might represent real geographic knowledge gets marginalised. The Imago Mundi is just one artefact, one clay tablet, but it's part of a pattern, ancient maps that show landmasses that shouldn't exist. The Piri Reis map shows Antarctica without ice. The Orontius Phineus map shows the same thing. The Zeno map shows islands in the North Atlantic that don't exist anymore, or at least not in the configuration shown. And then there's the question of how these maps were made. The Piri Reis map was created in 1513, but Piri Reis himself wrote that he based it on older source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. He was copying ancient knowledge, not discovering new lands. And that ancient knowledge showed the Antarctic coastline with remarkable accuracy, something that shouldn't have been possible because Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, and the coastline beneath the ice wasn't mapped until the 1950s using modern sonar. The same pattern appears in the Imago Mundi. The Babylonians weren't exploring the outer regions themselves. They were recording information passed down from earlier sources that had knowledge of lands that later civilizations lost or forgot. Mainstream historians explain these away as copying errors, artistic license, misinterpretations of coastlines. But when you see the same anomalies appearing across cultures and centuries, it starts to look less like coincidence and more like lost knowledge. Knowledge that someone had and then humanity lost. The bitter water that surrounds the world on the Imago Mundi. The Babylonians believed it was impassable, a boundary that couldn't be crossed, but they also drew 8 regions beyond it, which means somebody crossed it, or somebody told them about what was on the other side. And if we're being honest, the idea that ancient civilizations were confined to small geographic areas, that they never explored beyond their immediate regions, that's a modern assumption. we keep finding evidence that contradicts it. Roman coins in Australia, cocaine and tobacco in Egyptian mummies, plants that only grow in the Americas, ancient batteries in Baghdad. The list goes on. A Roman shipwreck was found off the coast of Brazil. Phoenician inscriptions have been discovered in North America. The ancient world was far more connected than we've been taught. If Romans could reach South America, if Phoenicians could cross the Atlantic, then why couldn't the Babylonians, with their sophisticated understanding of astronomy and navigation, have knowledge of lands far beyond their immediate territory? The bitter water that surrounds the world on the Imago Mundi might not have been as impassable as we think. Ancient sailors were capable of remarkable voyages. The Polynesians settled islands thousands of miles apart with nothing but outrigger canoes and an understanding of stars and currents. Viking ships reached North America 500 years before Columbus. We keep underestimating what ancient people could accomplish with the technology they had. And if they could travel those distances, they could bring back maps, they could describe what they saw, they could pass that knowledge down through generations until it ended up pressed into a clay tablet in Babylon, preserved for us to puzzle over thousands of years later. The Tartaria theory suggests there was a vast empire or civilization in northern Eurasia that was systematically erased from history. Whether you buy that or not, the Imago Mundi proves that the Babylonians knew about lands beyond the known world, lands they described with enough detail to suggest real knowledge, not imagination. Here's what makes the Tartaria connection stronger than most people realize. The eighth region on the Imago Mundi, the one describing a massive northern territory, includes descriptions that match other fragmentary references scattered across ancient texts. Persian sources mention a kingdom beyond the Caspian. Chinese records talk about a great northern civilization that controlled vast trade routes. Even Roman historians reference mysterious peoples in the far north who built in stone and had astronomical knowledge. These aren't consistent enough to prove anything definitively, but they're consistent enough to suggest that multiple ancient cultures knew about something in that region, something significant enough to record, something that later disappeared from the historical record so completely that modern scholars treat it as myth. The timing is suspicious too. The Imago Mundi dates to around 600 BCE. By the time we get to Greek cartography just a few centuries later, those outer regions are gone. The known world suddenly shrinks. The maps become more accurate in the sense that they only show lands the Greeks could personally verify. But in doing so, they lost whatever knowledge the Babylonians had preserved about lands beyond the bitter water. You have to ask yourself why that knowledge was lost. Was it simply because the Greeks were more skeptical, more scientific, more rigorous in their methods? Or was it because certain information was deliberately excluded from the new maps, the new histories, the new understanding of the world? So where is that land now? If it existed, why don't we see it? There are a few possibilities. One, it was an island or landmass that sank or was destroyed by geological events. Doggerland connected Britain to mainland Europe until about 500 BCE, then vanished beneath the North Sea. It's not impossible that a significant landmass existed in antiquity and is now underwater. Two, it's still there but unrecognizable due to climate change or ice coverage. The Arctic regions were warmer during certain historical periods. Areas that are now frozen could have supported civilizations. The Siberian landscape is dotted with archaeological anomalies that don't fit the official timeline. Three, it never physically existed and was a metaphysical or spiritual realm that the Babylonians described in geographic terms. Ancient cosmology often blended the physical and spiritual. Or four, it did exist, and the knowledge of it was suppressed when later empires rewrote the maps to erase any evidence of what came before. I'm not here to tell you which one is true. I'm here to show you the evidence and let you decide. The Imago Mundi exists. You can go see it. The inscriptions are real. The descriptions of the outer regions are documented. Whether those regions were physical places or something else, that's the question. What's undeniable is this. Somebody, thousands of years ago, had knowledge of a world beyond what we think they should have known. They drew it, they described it, they preserved it on clay. And then that knowledge disappeared. The maps changed. The lands beyond the bitter water stopped appearing in records. By the time the Greeks were making maps, the world had shrunk. Only the lands they could see and verify made it onto their charts. And that model, the Greek model, became the foundation for every map that followed. The Babylonian knowledge of outer regions was forgotten, or ignored, or buried. The Imago Mundi sat in the ruins of Babylon for over 2,000 years, and when it was finally dug up and translated, it showed us a version of the world that doesn't match what we've been taught. A world with an eighth continent, a world where the ancients knew more than we thought. You can dismiss it as mythology if you want. You can say the Babylonians were just guessing. But they weren't guessing when they calculated the movements of Venus. They weren't guessing when they built ziggurats that aligned with the stars. And they probably weren't guessing when they drew a map of the world and included lands that modern science says shouldn't be there. The oldest map in the world is a clay tablet, and it shows a continent that isn't there anymore. Whether it was lost to the ocean, lost to time, or lost to history, that's for you to figure out. But it was there on that map, and somebody knew about it. If you want more content like this, videos that dig into the artifacts they don't want you asking questions about, subscribe now. Next week I'm breaking down another ancient object that rewrites the timeline. It's already on screen. Click it. And if you made it this far, drop a comment. Tell me what you think happened to the 8th region. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.